Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, which is being broadcasted to the attendees by Fox Mandal in collaboration with the CII Indian Women Network. We are trying to put to you, as we have done in the past, such issues which have a lot of relevance in the post. At that time, it was the COVID era, the lockdown era, and now we have for you, while we move on, more information in the post-lockdown era. So now we move from stay home, stay safe to stay responsible, be responsible, and stay safe. And with a view to give you a feel of what is happening around us as we step out of the lockdown that the various states have imposed, we look at one subject in particular, and which is very, very important in the context of all the labor movement, etc., that we have seen. And this is the issue of labor reforms that the various states have undertaken. Before we delve into the session, I would like to mention to you that all the views that are being articulated in this session, in this webinar, are views that are being which are personal to the attendees. They're personal views. They may not be views of their organizations as well. And they are, in fact, views, which they subscribe to. The firm does not subscribe to those views, and the firm may have its own views. With that little disclaimer, I would like to move forward with this presentation that we have for you before we actually get into the detailed discussion with our panelists. I must say we have a very strong panel present for you here today. A mix of very strong and very reputed legal luminaries and industry players, so that we can give you a mix of views, a feel of what is happening on the ground. So we tried to get you legal minds from the states where these reforms are happening, and from the industry, where we tried to get players who have actually been there for a long time, who have dealt with labor issues, and who have largely a pan-India presence. With that, having said that, let us move on. First, let us understand what is really happening in the in this broad spectrum of governance and in the spectrum of industry when it comes to labor. So what was seen very recently, there were certain states like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, some states like UP came out with a draft ordinance. And to explain to you what an ordinance is, I'd request you to please read what is on the screen. An ordinance is a law that is promulgated by the President of India or governors of respected states on the advice of the central government or state government respectively for a limited period of time. The ordinance can be promulgated during recess of parliament or state legislatures. At this moment, because there is no legislature active at the moment, the state of UP, the government of UP has notified a draft ordinance which sets out the labor reforms that the government is intending to do. And with that, the government is intending to suspend all labor laws except for 4 major acts, which I will talk about a little later as we move forward. Now, similarly, the state of Gujarat has made an announcement, as we understand, not yet notified a draft ordinance like UP has done. Now, the announcement seems to suggest that the new industrial units also will be given similar benefits like suspension of all labor laws except a few, and other benefits will be given as well for a period of 1,200 days. Likewise, MP has made some announcements, and some of them have actually given executive orders as opposed to giving, putting out a draft ordinance like UP has done. Now, just to give you a feel of what some states have done, please see Uttar Pradesh has actually exempted from labor laws now when it is written industry, but actually it is not the industry per se, but it is the factories and certain and other manufacturing units. They have exempted all labor laws except the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, Workmen Compensation Act, Bonded Labor Abolition System Act, and a section of Payment of Wages Act, which will continue to be applicable. So not the whole Payment of Wages Act, but a section which is largely related with timing of payment, etc. Moving on, Gujarat, the new industrial establishments. Now, again, I'm repeating here, this is just an announcement. We have not seen a notified draft ordinance or any sort of executive order stating this. The new industrial establishments are exempted from all labor laws except the following, and this is as per the announcement which has been made. I would like to mention here that UP had notified certain changes to the working hours, which has now been rescinded. And Gujarat has also made certain changes to amended the Factories Act to some extent, and even the Contract Workers Act. And Madhya Pradesh has issued certain executive orders for the following. In fact, some very interesting points that they have brought in, or other interesting aspects that they have brought in, is that no inspection to be done by inspectors, but third-party firms, third-party inspection has been allowed. How that will play out, what that means over a period of time, we will come to know. But for the moment, just to let you know that, just to refresh your memory and to pass on the information as to what is happening when we talk about labor reforms in the various states, these are the 3 states in particular that we have for you today. We have with us senior advocates from UP and Gujarat. Our panelist from Gujarat is finding it a little difficult due to technical snags, and hopefully he will be joining us shortly. Now, moving on, just to give you a sense of why this is an issue and why there is a concern around this. Labor laws are essentially beneficial legislations. What are beneficial legislations? Beneficial legislation is a statute which purports to confer a benefit on an individual or a class of persons. It is basically to, where there is liberal interpretation of the statute to further the object of the act, which is usually beneficial in nature. So basically, it is understood that labor laws are beneficial in nature because the workers or the employees need that little extra hand holding, and that is what is in the legal terms called beneficial legislation. Now, if you go above that, I have mentioned about Supreme Court judgment on hire and fire. And this was a very interesting judgment, Central Inland Water Transport Corporation Limited and another. If you see this judgment, it talks about, a contract. This was about terminating an employee with just a simple notice. It was where it was opined that a contract like that is a contract between a lion and lamb to roam freely and be free to devour. So, things like hire and fire has not been looked at very positively in the jurisprudence that has evolved over the years. And since this will also be an important point that we are going to touch upon today, I thought, it will be good to give you a little bit of perspective into what is hire fire, what is beneficial legislation, what is an ordinance, what is an executive order. With that, I will just quickly outline a few issues that we are going to touch upon today. Firstly, I would like to understand from the panelists, and we will talk about it, what are labor laws? Labor as a law is not defined anywhere. Labor is not defined anywhere. The words used are employees, workmen, workers. So what are labor laws? What comes within the ambit of labor laws? Then, we have to bear in mind that India is a welfare state, and the doctrine of social justice is enshrined in the constitution. Social justice, as we all understand, is a very self-explanatory term. And also we must understand that India has agreed to certain international principles. India has ratified the ILO Convention number 144, which promotes tripartite consultation. Tripartism is something that is very, very, it's the essence of a lot of ILO conventions and a lot of international thought process, and consultative process between the authorities, employer and worker is encouraged globally. So with that context, making such big reforms, such big changes where actually your beneficial legislations are going to be suspended or curtailed is the sense we are getting from the limited information that is out there. Is that so? Will that be open to judicial scrutiny? Or first of all, is that true? Are we curtailing the beneficial legislations by these reforms? The ones that have been set out there, the ones that we are hearing about in the media. What is happening truly? Let us try and understand with the panel that we have with us. And most important, let us also understand and the one big question: has the time for such labor reforms actually arrived? And with that, I will go to our panel members. I will first introduce our panel members. Our first panel member is Mr. Prashant Chandra. Mr. Prashant Chandra is a name to reckon with in UP and in Lucknow in particular. Mr. Prashant Chandra is a designated senior counsel practicing for over 4 decades, primarily at the Lucknow High Court. Mr. Chandra has had appearances at virtually all high courts of the country and has also appeared multiple times in the Honorable Supreme Court as well. Mr. Chandra has undertaken multiple public interest litigations and very, very prominent litigations in UP and in other high courts as well. Now, with our second panelist again is Mr. Shalin Mehta. Mr. Mehta started his practice in Gujarat High Court in the year 1997 after pursuing LLM from Columbia Law School. Mr. Mehta was designated as a senior in 2012. While Mr. Mehta practices mainly in Gujarat High Court, he has also appeared in the Honorable Supreme Court and to his credit has a many landmark cases, but one such landmark case is the case of state of Gujarat and others versus PWD employees and others, and in fact has often represented a lot of employees. So getting his thoughts today will be very, very useful for us. I would like to welcome Mr. Chandra and Mr. Mehta today. I'm not sure if Mr. Mehta has been able to join us yet. We are trying to work with him to sort out the technical snag, and hopefully he'll be with us soon. The third panelist from the industry is Dr. Jaikumar. Dr. C. Jaikumar is a highly result-oriented HR professional with 32 years of experience in engineering and construction industry, with proven experience in successfully planning and designing, implementing, and managing successful HR initiatives. Dr. Jaikumar has a PhD in the area of leadership from University of Madras and is currently the Vice President and Head Corporate Human Resource L&T. We also have with us Ms. Vanitha Datla. Ms. Datla is the Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Elico Limited, and Managing Director, Elico Healthcare Services Limited. Elico is a 60-year-old company with experience in innovating to connect science with lab. Ms. Datla wears many hats, and Ms. Datla was the past chairperson of CII Telangana and was also the past chairwoman of CII IWIN, with whom we have partnered today for this session. Ms. Datla was also awarded the Business Achiever Award for Excellence by Andhra Pradesh Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Mr. Jaikumar and Ms. Datla. We are very happy to have you with us today, and we look forward to your contribution in the session. I'm sure it's going to be very insightful. Please also welcome Mr. L.N. Prasad. Mr. Prasad carries with him rich, I would say very rich, hands-on experience of 30 years in handling HR and IR issues in the manufacturing and service sector. Mr. Prasad has worked in both domestic and multinational companies. Mr. Prasad currently is positioned as DGM Legal and Risk Management at Toyota, and Mr. Prasad has handled many on-ground issues like lockout strikes, fire accidents. I think who better than this panel to give us a very, very good mix of first legal and also the industry related, very practical and very real insightful thoughts. So with that, I will move to Mr. Prashant Chandra, sir. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel, sir. We really look forward to enriching ourselves today with your rich experience. Sir, to begin with, I have one question for you, which is a very, very basic and a fundamental question, sir. Are we ready for these reforms? And the second follow-up question to that, sir, is if we are ready for these reforms, are we ready for these drastic reforms like suspension of laws, which UP has done, sir?
I missed your question because of the problem in the internet. If you could repeat your question.
Sir, the first question is, are we ready for the reforms, labor reforms, sir? And the second to follow up with that, sir, is that if we are ready for reforms, do we want such drastic reforms? Are we ready for such drastic reforms where we are actually going to suspend laws?
Well, in my view, these reforms are long overdue, because in the past almost 70 years, whatever reforms have taken place, we notice that these reforms primarily are on account of the dialogue which the industry or the government has had with the labor unions as such, you see, and most of them are more in favor of the labor than balancing the interests of the industry and the labor both. And if you look into these various amendments, the backbone of all the labor laws is primarily the pattern which had been set up by the Britishers in their time. But if you look into the amendments which have been made all these years, then mostly you would find that these amendments are a result of various settlements which have been arrived at between the trade unions and the government and the employer. And they have gone into the statute book, the changes which have been incorporated. So ultimately, over the years, what we find is that all these so-called labor reforms in which the government has indulged are overwhelmingly tilted in favor of the workmen. And if you go into a further in-depth study of the whole thing, then one thing you would notice is that it ultimately doesn't go to the benefit of the workmen also, because it is basically the labor unions who negotiate, and the poor worker is not even aware as to what is happening. For instance, when this ordinance was issued by the government of UP, followed by the ordinance was a notification which was issued, and that notification sought to make certain amendments in the Factories Act, particularly pertaining to the hours of work and the shift and all those things. This was taken very, not very kindly by the labor unions. And besides having filed a writ petition in the High Court challenging this notification, they are reportedly have approached the government also and almost threatened the government with large-scale strikes and abstinence from work if this is maintained, which compelled the government to withdraw the notification, because even before the writ petition could be taken up for orders, the notification was withdrawn. Now, has anybody ever thought that the worker was not even informed as to what the notification had intended to do with the worker? In practice, if you see, then most of the workers, it basically talked about the shift being extended to 12 hours. A factory employs a worker, and the employer is restricted to have the workman work for 8 hours, and thereafter he has to leave him off. The worker, most of the workers they want to stay on further, and they want to finish the work which is in hand, for which they would be paid a little more. Whatever further they put in, they'll obviously get. Now you are preventing that worker to work further, whereas you are creating a situation for the employer to employ further hands, so that he may be compelled to increase the number of employees which he is required to employ. Because once you increase a particular number, say 100, then you are susceptible to certain rigors of the labor laws, which is very, very difficult to follow. This is what the employer says. Whether they are difficult or not, that's a different thing. But this amendment, which has been brought in by the ordinance which was promulgated by the state of UP, was primarily to ease out the situation which was sought to be perpetuated by COVID. Not that it was not in existence, but it was sought to be perpetuated by COVID, where there was mass unemployment because of the closure of the factory and all those things. So I personally feel that when the ordinance was promulgated, then the basics which are required to be taken care of in the favor of the worker was looked into and taken care of. It is a different thing that there are no objects and there are no statements and all those things preceding an ordinance, which normally is there in every ordinance. But if you dispassionately read the entire ordinance, then I'm sure some thought must have gone behind it before they promulgated this ordinance.
Right.
Particularly if you look into sections 3 and 4 of the ordinance, which has been promulgated by the state of UP, they have categorically spelled out as to what benefits which were available with the workers will continue. The minimum wage will continue, the safety measures will continue, the Factories Act has been suspended, except for, of course, the notification which came, which was ultimately rescinded. That was only for the limited purpose of extending the shift period, hours of shift or the shift period or whatever. But otherwise, the existing labor laws, whatever under the existing labor laws, whatever you have achieved or the benefits which are available to you, they will still be available to you. So it is some exercise which is sought to be done in the future to see. And that is why apparently it is for 3 years. This is what the ordinance says. So let us give it a try. There is no difficulty in doing it, because one thing is clear, that once you give some benefits or to the industry also or to the employer, then you are bound to improve and increase productivity and production both.
So with that, sir, two thoughts come to my mind, and I must thank you. That's a very good insight you've given, because what we hear from the media and we pick up little bits of pieces, from everywhere, we don't get the real picture. So thank you very much for giving us the real picture and making us understand that yes, thought has gone into it. But sir, what is coming out to me from these, from what you have said, of course, and from what I read of the legislation, do you believe that from one end we have gone to the other end, sir? Because these are beneficial legislations, and not just the minimum wage or safety conditions, security. We have to look beyond that, and we have to also see the dispute resolution process in the IDA, or the clauses in the provisions in the IDA which protect the workers from oppression and exploitation. Agreed that the union was probably taking undue advantage, but then from one end we've gone to the other, and maybe some moderation in between would have been good enough.
In fact, if you look into the ordinance and if you see section 3, then the basics which are required to be given to the workmen, they have been maintained. The minimum wage has been maintained, the safety measures have been maintained, the building construction workers, which has a lot of cess involved, they have been maintained, because that is basically for the welfare of the worker. So it is not that all the benefits have been taken away. Now let us understand as to what is the basic scheme of the labor legislation in India. All these problems which a labor is encountered with during employment, and if he is aggrieved by it, he has a right to approach the court of law, whether it is written or codified or not. If it is a common law violation of any right, he has a right to go there. These legislations were basically brought in to smoothen the time taken and to summarily decide the disputes and to introduce a process of conciliation between the employer and the employee. Now, this was beneficial to both, because it shifted from the normal course of the adversarial litigation system to specialized forums, and this had the effect of basically curbing the delays which were caused in litigation and providing some recourse to the labor as well as to the industry both. But gradually, the way that it developed, and almost the entire labor workforce was sabotaged by the unions. I don't know why, but in practice, I've been noticing that most of the disputes arise because of the stands taken by the unions. And the poor worker is not even aware what is happening. So all this benefit or whatever is being conferred to the unions, this also needs to be looked into. And this is one of the things which is sought to be taken away and not conferred by the amendment by introducing the ordinance. And that is why perhaps it is irking the unions more.
I see. So then in that case, now that the IDA probably is suspended if this ordinance goes through and the way things are going, similar exercise was being taken at the union level. There's a lot of news that is out there that, and we have seen from 2018 the amendments in the Trade Union Act, and we have seen the wage code that is yet to be notified. So there is a thought process, a good consultative process that has gone on at the union level, where they have consulted through special committees, standing committees, through, with the various unions, etc., to put all these laws in 4 codes and, sort of streamline these laws and make sure that all these irritant issues that are there are all streamlined. So with that thought being done in the union level, do you believe that this was a little premature at the state level to go ahead and suspend laws at this point? Because what will happen eventually, those will get rationalized, and then there will be a conflict between the two.
No, there won't be a conflict between the two, because that it is true that all the labor laws are in the concurrent list, and therefore, both the state as well as parliament has right to make laws, except that there should be no inconsistency with the central laws. That, of course, is there. That is the basic thought behind it. But I don't think otherwise there would be inconsistency, because there is a lot of fields which are uh, not coming within the purview of the central legislation. They are unique to a particular state. So therefore, that much of leverage the state has. Now, in this particular situation, which basically perpetuated the issuance of the ordinance, it is not that it is not in the offing. Because if you look into the ordinance, it cannot be said to be COVID based. It is not so.
Correct.
So there is, as I said earlier, there is some thought which has gone behind in promulgating the ordinance. So it is a thought out process. And once the state feels more in need of it, and the state takes the first step forward, it doesn't mean that it is going against the principles what the union is basically contemplating upon.
So maybe the act will have a more detailed statement of object and reason, so that we'll have a better understanding as to where this act is coming from. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it may not be COVID driven, but they are looking at attracting industry from the other countries which are coming out as a result of COVID.
That is one of the things, as you said, the central government has been contemplating over it since the year 2018, 2017. Right. So because at that point of time, there was no COVID and things like that, you see. So it is not that the government is not feeling about it, because if you look back into it, the sort of progress that we were looking at, which we ought to have made, which the other third world countries have actually made, don't you think it is attributable to the labor problem also in this country?
Absolutely.
There is one big problem, and that is this so-called Inspector Raj, which is there. Now, I'll just give you an example. Now, there are labor legislations which provide that if you employ more than 100 people in your factory, then you have to abide by certain laws which are, you can say, very, very steep and very, very cumbersome for the factory to abide by, particularly if it's a nascent factory. So they don't want to increase the number from more than 90. Now, but if in case they are actually in need of it, what they do is they come up with a number of factories doing the same work. Now, labor from one factory cannot be employed in the other factory, but the employer has to take care of this. So they employ the labor one factory, the other. Now comes the problem of the inspector. So he has to be managed. So who in turn ultimately gains? Is the workman gaining in any manner? If you're talking in terms of withdrawal of the support which the workman should have, or the privileges which the workman is entitled to under the constitution, all those things, but is he actually getting it? So if the government has thought of a process where it wants to get over it and see as to how it works, why don't you give 3 years to the government where for 70 years we've not been able to do anything?
I see your point, sir. I see your point, and Inspector Raj has been quite a concern which most of the industry has had, and truly, as you rightly said, it never went down to the workers. Our only fear, and that is the fear being articulated that we read in the other, all over, is about Jungle Raj. So are we going from removal of Inspector Raj to Jungle Raj, where it's hire fire and it's all open to all? That is the one concern probably that is coming up.
No, actually, that concern should not be there because of the provisions of the ordinance itself, the way the government is going about it. Because as I said, those things which are absolutely essential for a good human life, those have been secured by the ordinance. So those labor legislations, they have not been done away with. The minimum wage is there, for instance, the safety measures are there, for instance. So all these things are there. So that should not be a cause of, so give it a try for the next 3 years. Where is the difficulty? All practical problems which crop up, it is not that this is something which cannot be deviated from. After all, the government has the right to make the amendments as and when the needs are felt.
Right.
Let us give it a try.
Absolutely hear you, sir. Only challenge may be that 3 years may be a very short window, because after 3 years, again, that if we have to transition to the various acts, it may be an issue. But then, as you rightly said, government will intervene at that point and make sure that the transition is.
If the apprehensions which are being expressed are actually true, then maybe even before the period of 3 years is over, the government realizes it and will
absolutely
after 3 years. But give it a try. That's what I'm trying to say, because there are a lot of theoretical things which have been happening. But why don't you practically try it out?
Absolutely, well taken, sir. Very nice points. Because and I'm so happy that we could get these views from you, because we are not getting it outside anywhere. And straight from somebody who's locally present in ground zero, I think this is very helpful. And I'm sure attendees will also carry a lot of information back from here today. And from UP, let us move to Gujarat, sir. Mehta ji, thank you so much. You've been patiently waiting. I'm sorry that you had some technical snags and we were trying to fix that initially. I'm so happy that you could come back and join us today. So coming back to Gujarat, and your views matter to us a lot because, you know, as Prashant sir has said, give the government a shot, let the government do what they are out to do, and, you know, there will definitely be something practical that will come out of it. UP is very advanced in its stage of, you know, passing the ordinance. The draft is out. But in Gujarat, there is very little out there. I mean, of course, for the Factories Act Amendment and the Contract Workers Act Amendment, the Regulation and Abolition Amendment, except for these two, nothing much really has happened in Gujarat. But there's been a political will which has been demonstrated. There's been an announcement that has been which has been out there. And that announcement says that for the new industrial units, certain labor laws, most of the labor laws will be suspended except for a few, which I believe are 3, for a period of 1200 days. And is that a correct understanding in the first place?
Yes. So in any case, I have to imagine a Gujarat with the ordinance because as far as Gujarat is concerned, only an announcement has been made. But as I understand that suppose tomorrow Gujarat were to announce or to promulgate this ordinance, then what happens is that all labor laws except 3 are suspended for a period of 1,200 days for the new industrial units to set up, to come and invest. Obviously, investment is not a problem. Actually, investment is always good. But the question, you can't really ignore the legal question because then the ordinance, is it immune from attack? That's the whole issue. And I mean, as far as India is concerned, judicial review of plenary legislation dates back to the Constitution of India, isn't it? Our courts have time and again, they have held actually that an act of parliament or even an act of state legislature can be declared void on the ground of violation of Part 3, that is a chapter on fundamental rights. So, as I understand this ordinance, even if it were to be promulgated, there is a likelihood it's going to be challenged on the anvil of Article 14. Supreme Court has said in Royappa that Article 14 again has 2 dimensions: discrimination, arbitrariness. So potentially you have 2 grounds of attack here: discrimination and arbitrariness. As far as discrimination is concerned, I may be willing to concede that the government of the day might be able to convince any constitutional court that the presence of X or Y factor post-COVID and the absence of X or Y factor pre-COVID actually is comparing apples and oranges. And therefore, this is a case of reasonable classification. There is no discrimination. But I am more concerned about the other attack, the other ground of manifest arbitrariness. And there are 2 recent decisions. Since I can't, there are 2 decisions actually. One is Joseph Shine, 2019 3 SEC 39, and the other is Pioneer Urban Land Infrastructure Limited 2019 8 SEC 416, where the Supreme Court has reiterated that plenary legislations can be declared void on the ground of manifest arbitrariness. In Shaira Bano, 2017 9 SEC 1, the Supreme Court said that the doctrine of proportionality, that doctrine which we use for testing administrative actions, even that can be used for testing legislations. Now, if that is so, I have a different take on this ordinance because according to me, the major concern is that when you bring about reforms, you've got to identify the stakeholders. And according to me, in this case, the stakeholders are obviously the industry, the workers, and even the general public, because ultimately they are the ultimate consumers of what we make and what we produce. And then don't forget the government, because the government has to use its regulatory power to ensure that people play by the rules. Now, here what happens, according to me, I've not looked at the ordinance, but according to me, if the ordinance is ignoring a stakeholder as important as the working class, I don't see it passing constitutional muster, because I think it's the Supreme Court can well declare it to be unconstitutional on the ground of violating the doctrine of proportionality. That's
but Mehta ji, just to, as Prashant sir was pointing out, there are provisions in the ordinance, in the draft ordinance, where certain benefits of the workers have been taken care of. For example, minimum wages, their security, women maternity issues, all these things have been taken care of, bonded labor. The
Correct.
building and construction workers. But the question there is that enough? What has been done, is that enough? Because just to add on to my question, what about the Industrial Disputes Act, or what about the Contract Workers Regulation and Abolition Act, where certain provisions are there? For example, dispute resolution between the two, management and the employees, or rather, protection to the employee if there is a wrong termination, things like these. Do you believe that these being suspended then would be something that will be a matter of scrutiny, judicial scrutiny?
Oh, definitely. So that's okay. So that's what I want to come at. I do agree that certain aspects are taken care of by the ordinance, but according to me, one of the most important things is job security, and job security is taken away. It's completely wiped, because understand one thing, that if the IPA, if the IDA is wiped out, then what is the parliament doing? The parliament is actually thinking that let's leave the whole thing to the market forces, because ultimately the supply and demand of labor will work out some kind of equilibrium, and you don't really need the invisible hand. Now, which actually brings us to hire and fire. Now, the question to be asked is that is hire and fire, because that is a protection, rock bottom protection that the IDA provides. Now, if you come back to hire and fire, the question is that is this then consistent with our constitutional ethos? Is it compatible with the directive principles of state policy, which are obviously which can't be enforced, but then they are fundamental in the governance of the country? And remember that we Indians have given unto ourselves a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and not any Ayn Rand, Chicago School, Milton Friedman like a democratic republic, where market forces are oracles of truth, and people can be left to fend for themselves, and regulation is a fraud. Actually, if you see it even from the Supreme Court's perspective, it's very interesting. What does Supreme Court say about hire and fire jurisprudence? There is Barmer Lorry. This is Barmer Lorry and Company, 2013, 8 SEC page 345. Obviously, Barmer Lorry is a PSU. It started out as a partnership, actually became a PSU in 1975. In this case, there is clause 11A of the letter of appointment, which was challenged. This clause allowed hire and fire. I can just read out. The clause was: the company shall have the right at its sole discretion to terminate your services by giving you 3 calendar months notice in writing and without assigning any reason. So this is pure hire and fire. Now, interesting. What did the Supreme Court say? Let me just quote these few lines. The Constitution provides for achieving social and economic justice. Article 14 of the Constitution guarantees to all persons equality before the law and equal protection of the law. Thus, it is necessary to strike down an unfair and unreasonable contract, or an unfair or unreasonable clause in a contract that has been entered into by the parties who do not enjoy equal bargaining power, and hence hit by Section 23 of the Contract Act, and where such a condition of provision becomes unconscionable, unfair, unreasonable, and further is against public policy. So, right. Ms. Kamble, if you are asking me to imagine a world without IDA, fine, because Parliament can repeal IDA just as easily as it enacted the IDA. But the question is that you come back to hire and fire. Hire and fire is not consistent, compatible with your constitutional ethos. But even if it were, let's say that we have to move ahead with the times, because there is one theory that says that this constitution is a living document. Okay, we've got to change the times. Okay, fine. From a socialist democratic republic, we try to embrace capitalism with the human face. Then also, the problem we have is that the Supreme Court on hire and fire doesn't seem to favor a complete carte blanche as far as.
With that thought, sir, here is my question, sir. Given that IDA will not be there, and as you rightly pointed out, hire and fire is not in the IDA, it is a constitutional provision. Even if the IDA was to go today, all the matters, all the disputes that would arise would go before the trial court. Or, and there the court will look at it from this perspective of whether it is hire fire, whether it is something where the bargaining powers have, obviously the employee was at a disadvantage, and would the courts then not apply the same principles as have evolved over the years in jurisprudence?
No, so yes, I agree, because so what happens is that if you don't have IDA, it's not that I mean, absence of IDA is going to be declared as unconstitutional, because I mean, you can't force Parliament to have legislation. But then what you do is that if you don't have IDA, you go back to the trial court, isn't it?
Yes.
Now the difference, the material difference, this is again the Supreme Court has said, the material difference between a trial court, civil court, and a labor court is that the labor court and industrial tribunals have the power to enact contracts. That is why you have the provision of reinstatement. As far as trial court is concerned, the trial court can only declare a contract to be bad, or the trial court can merely say that yes, there is a breach of contract, but then it can only award damages. This is the material difference between a trial court and a labor court. As far as labor court and industrial tribunals are concerned, there are clear provisions in the Act which provide for reinstatement. So I don't think, according to me, if you ask me that IDA is not there, you only have the trial court to fall back on. I don't think that's enough for the worker. I don't think so.
So in a sense, sir, what I hear from you, sir, is that reinstatement probably will no longer be a remedy available. At best,
Correct.
the remedy available will be damages and breach. And maybe
Correct.
going forward, this may, so if we go by the understanding that, you know, let us give this a chance and let us see how this plays out. So then two things come out. It is not as if there is no protection. There will be some protection which is generally available under ordinary jurisprudence. But
Correct.
what will happen is reinstatement and such related measures which are available in the IDA will no longer be available. Maybe this will then be open to market forces. The person will probably get damages and move on to another organization. So then to some extent, sir, do you believe in the current social dynamic situation, would it not be better for the worker to move on to another organization, get the damages, move on, instead of going back to the organization, being discontented there and then not being able to continue properly there? So you know, maybe the time has come to look at it a little differently.
Well, maybe. I mean, we can have good reforms. I'm not for a minute doubting actually that we don't have reforms actually, but the point I'm making is that understand one thing, that India has its own social dynamics. We can't compare ourselves with US. Still 50% of the population is living below poverty line. I don't think 50% of the people even know actually what their rights are.
Right.
And therefore, there is this problem of leaving it to the market forces, because if you have seen, market forces always favor the rich. That's what I think Brojanath Ganguly and all those judgments, that long line of Supreme Court judgments, they recognize the fact that when it's a contract between an employer-employee, it's a contract between a lamb and a lamb. And these are the words the Supreme Court uses.
Absolutely.
Now, the point is that in these,
yes.
Exactly. Now the point is that in these 50 years, I'm not saying that we should be stuck with what we have, but in these 50 years, what has the experience of India shown? Have we progressed? Have we moved to a society where workers are really empowered? Workers are powerful. Workers on their own actually can negotiate? No, because you still need unions. And that disparity, according to me, that disparity is going to be a difficult, very, very difficult mismatch. Again, just coming back, just one more point actually on the IDA, because I still think that whether IDA really has stood the test of time. I do agree with Mr. Chandra that it's 73 years old. It's time to revamp, time to even probably get rid of it. Maybe. But I'm not of the view that you don't have anything else in place. Actually, if you go to see it, if you do a dispassionate analysis of the Supreme Court, how has the Supreme Court reacted to the repeated challenges made before it by employers of those so-called industry obnoxious provisions contained in Chapter 5B of the IDA? Very interesting.
Yes.
The first, actually, there is only one decision in Excelware, 1978, the old Section 25O closure. The Supreme Court declared that to be unconstitutional. Okay, because not really actually saying that this is violative Article 19(1)(g), but the Supreme Court found a problem with the provision because the provision allowed the government to reject permission without giving reasons. But then what happened after that? In 1992, you had validity of Section 25N being challenged. That's retrenchment. In Meenakshi Mills, Supreme Court upheld the Vides. Then I believe in 2002, Section 25M, that prohibition of layoff, Vides challenged. Again, Supreme Court upholds that in Papnasam Labor Union. Then the last one in 2002, that's the amended Section 25O was challenged. And this time again, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court in Orissa, Steel Limited, Supreme Court said that, look, Article 19(1)(g) argument was repelled, it was bunked. And the Supreme Court said that no, this Vides, we are upholding this Vides. We are relying on Meenakshi Mills. So if you look at what the Supreme Court is doing, according to me, the Supreme Court is viewing IDA as a neutral legislation which has balanced the rights of employers and employees. I don't think it has become lopsided. I am again having said that, I'm not saying that you don't introduce amendments. We have to reform our system. And actually, COVID-19 is a very good reason, because COVID-19 has altered all our ongoing equations and calculations. This is a great time. This is a great time for reform. But I would only say two things actually. That one, when you introduce reforms, two things are required to be kept in mind. One, don't fall a prey to knee-jerk reactions, because believe me, in these times of a pandemic, we all fall a prey to short-term measures, because till the vaccine is found, it's not that the vaccine is not going to be found. The vaccine is going to be found actually, but we will fall a prey to short-term measures. I would go for long-term measures to shorten litigation, to encourage speedy disposal and arbitration of industrial disputes. Also, I would also encourage industry to shun sharp, unfair, and exploitative labor practices. And here it's very interesting actually. If you in India, they say in jest that every decade we keep on adding a category to the worker tag. We started with seasonal, then we had badli, then we had daily, then we have work charge, then we have casual, then we have contractual, and now the last one is outsourcing. Okay, fine. You can retain these guys actually for some time, but the problem is that you can't say like once a mortgage is always a mortgage, once a daily wager is always a daily wager. The problem is that you keep on employing these people in the same fashion for years together, and then you do nothing about it.
Absolutely, that's a very well taken point. That's a very well taken point.
Second, just one last thing actually. Second, for reforms, I would always say that identify the stakeholders, because the stakeholders are not only the industry, it is the working class, it is the public, and it is the government.
So from what I see, from what Mr. Chandra has said and what I hear from Mr. Mehta, I think there is going to be more thought process around it. While the government has started from one end, there will be evolution, and there will be, as Mr. Chandra rightly said, give them a chance. As Mr. Mehta rightly said, everything cannot be left to market forces. At some point that moderation will happen, and probably that's where the government is coming from. That is why they've made it 3 years, so that they want to see how it will play out. Yes, it may be a little cumbersome to see how things will play out in the short run, not without thinking about the long term. So, but we must not forget that the overall jurisprudence, the constitution still continues, and the courts are there. The maybe summary proceedings under IDA have gone, but or may go, but at the end of the day, the courts will look at it from the overall ethos as set out in the constitution. And with that, I would also like to make one observation that maybe the thought process of the government is that the industry is asking for reforms. Give the industry the reforms they want. Let us hope that the industry is matured enough now to handle these reforms and take care of their workers, their laborers, their employees, the way they should be, in a very just, fair, and equitable manner. With that, I will go to the thought. I will go to the industry. And my first question to you, Jayakumar sir, is: do you believe the industry is ready for these reforms? Do you believe the industry is matured enough to do what the government would like you to do, to take care not just of the basic minimum wages or security, but even the working conditions? There should be no oppression or no exploitation of the workers, the workmen, the labor, the employees. Do you believe that the industry is ready for that role? Sir, you're mute, sir. While sir speaking, I'd request anyone who has questions, the attendees, please put your questions in the chat box.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you, Purnima, for this opportunity. Happy to be with the senior advocates from High Court and my professional colleagues. Let me give a different perspective. Both of them talk very much in depth about the enactments. So the economy is going through a very, very turbulent phase. Okay, it's an unprecedented. We have gone through the phases much earlier, not in my lifetime. I've heard and studied about Great Depression or the swine flu and the plague and all those things. But it is every organization, every company is under trouble. Some sectors are under deep trouble, like if it is a tourism, or if you take about the aviation, retail, etc. And the challenges for most of the organization is, first is the cash flow, and next is the cost. You have lost 2.5 months Now, still it is not clear how much more time it will take, when it is the normal going to come up, or when we find out the vaccine and when things will become normal. So the lost time has to be caught up now, right? So how do you go about? So one more added challenge to is there's a fear, there is a anxiety among people, anxiety on most of the workers. I don't want to call migrant workmen, let me call guest workers from the other states who have come here. What happens to them? There's a panic. They hear whatever in the media and whatever is happening nearby, and the family, the kith and kin tell them to come back. So most of you saw in the news and papers, they wanted to go back. And so once they go back, then the next will be the monsoons will may come and they'll get into agriculture. So there's a lot of pressure on the employers. So any amendments, notifications or changes which is brought out in order to help the ecosystem, whether the employer, employee, vendor, subcontractor, is welcome. Okay, but I'm extremely happy that in the last couple of things have been brought out. Maybe it is a small short-term measures to tie over the situation, right from a lot of things in the PF Act as well as the ESI, or if you talk about many states which we talked about increasing the working hours and in the factories, so that the lost time can be cut off. That may be a short-term measure. But this specifically, if you talk about the ordinance which is brought out in UP, MP as well as Gujarat, MP at least it is for some particular 11 industries, and most of the provisions are there. When it came to UP, when you see that, but as rightly, I agree with Prasant Chandra, the core is kept. You have to pay minimum wages, you have to pay on time, you have taken care of health and safety, you have taken care of women employees, you have taken care of bonded, ensure that exploitation is done in bonded, not done in bonded labors. You have ensured migrant workers' cess is kept, safety is kept. So all the core is retained. What is stopped is the other normal procedural aspect of it, and Prasant gave a different picture of job security part of it. Today, my only question is it the right time to bring this? If it had happened before COVID, I would have told, yeah, wonderful. It is like 90s when we brought the LPG. People said there will be foreign players are coming because of competition, our industry will lose. But it was totally a turn, right? It turned around. So when the economy is growing up, when there's a demand for workforce, the demand and supply equilibrium will work together, and nobody can exploit. If I start exploiting, the labor will leave and he will go. He will go to the next door and work. Today, the biggest challenge is getting me workforce. Today, I have put up people across the country to get and bring workers for the different projects. So it is not the buyer's seller's market, it is a buyer's market. We are behind, the employer is behind workers. So every reform, this radical reform, according to me, it's a radical reform which has been brought out. But is it the right time? Because of COVID, lot of employment have lost, everything is lost. There is a lot of unemployment, there is underemployment, there is a poverty. Whether all employers will really support this, or will there be an exploitation, is a small question. But
sir, as we hear you, then what you're saying is timing perhaps may not be right, but this is not, the equilibrium today can be struck because the workers are very matured workers also. They
Yes.
also have an inherent bargaining power given the sheer numbers and the supply issues and the demand issues that are there. So
Yes.
they have inherent bargaining powers. They perhaps don't need a third layer of the union in between to help them bargain. They probably will be able to go to another employer if they are not happy with the employer that they have currently. So you believe that the whole circumstances, the dynamics has changed from what it was back, 70 years back, or over the years where amendments have happened, and we are looking at a very different mindset today. My only question, sir, and I will come back to you with that question, is about the unorganized sector, but keeping that thought there, sir, I will move on to Vanitha Garu. Vanitha Garu, you are representing MSMEs today, and you also representing a very substantial workforce, which is the part of the workforce, which is the women. So what do you think? Are we ready? And I'm asking you this question in two contexts. One is, of course, the labor as you see it from an MSME perspective. And second is women in the workforce. Do you think really we are at a place where, you know, the equilibrium which is being talked about by everyone will work out in such a way that, you know, with minimum intervention for women, there will be acceptance, they will get skill upgradation, they will get equal opportunities to work? So with these two questions, ma'am, your views.
So thank you, Purnima. And yes, especially what Mr. Jaykumar had mentioned, that today India, the industry in India is actually mature enough to accept labor reforms, which are much needed. I think it has been time and again said that the last 70 years, whatever the industrial ecosystem was present at that point of the time, these laws and regulations were drafted keeping that in view. But today they no longer are pertinent. Today, if, as Mr. Mehta had also mentioned, if hire and fire is allowed in industry, I think industry should be given the freedom to understand how it would like to make its profits. If it doesn't see revenues, if it doesn't see growth, then what is the point on keeping such a huge labor on your payroll? So yes, in such circumstances, I feel government needs to play a much larger role. See, in the US, I know he did comment that we cannot compare ourselves to the US, and we have the social implications because we need to look at the masses, that a huge percentage of that is below the poverty line today. But what is the government doing in terms of skilling these masses? Why are the labor exchange centers not actually looking at skilling these people? Why isn't money being put into those areas? Today, if I'm a business owner and if I feel that I don't have revenues for the last 2 months, do I want to keep my my entire employees on the payroll and not keep paying them because I have no source of revenue? Rather than that, will I lay off people? If I was in the US, which probably has been done, people have been laid off left, right, and center, but that is where the government actually stepped in and trying to pay them unemployment benefits and helping them to sustain and tide over until they get a new job. Is Indian government doing that? Are any of the state governments doing that? I don't think so. And I think the legal luminaries on this panel can actually help me on that front. The second point that you made is the women in the workforce. Today, I don't think any state in the country, as well as in the central government, no policy actually addresses women in the workforce. This is a huge talent chunk that we are actually missing out that can actually contribute back to the economy. And by not addressing their concerns, I think we are missing out on a huge chunk which can actually contribute to the growth of the GDP. So yes, I think it is high time that labor reforms do happen. They happen in a holistic manner, looking at all the stakeholders, which was actually mentioned by Mr. Mehta also. Here, the stakeholders are, yes, the unskilled, the semi-skilled, also the overqualified women who are just sitting at home and not accessing the labor market. Why aren't we not looking at trying to incentivize those women? There is quite a funny statistic that is going around, doing a lot of rounds, that says that India has the highest number of overqualified homemakers. That means that we have been investing in our women, we have been educating them, they have been getting qualifications, yet none of these women are actually contributing to the economy. And I think that is a huge, it's quite sad that the country is not recognizing this gap and addressing that gap.
Thank you very much, Vanitha Garu. Those are excellent views. And in fact, I would like to say that I find this very interesting that you brought in a third dimension to the labor reforms. And the third dimension is that, if you are looking at the market forces, you are looking at the equilibrium to be settling out on its own, the dynamics between the employer and the employee, then the employer should also be comfortable from a business standpoint to be able to pass on those benefits to the employee. And if the if the benefits are not passed on, then there may be a problem. But so now there is a third dimension that I hear from you. And
so I can just add a little small personal anecdote. My son lives in the US, and in late March, when this pandemic actually hit, he got laid off from his company, and immediately he was actually given a lot of benefits from the federal government. In fact, the stimulus package actually helped giving them unemployment benefits, and they got in some salary checks from the federal government. But I don't think that is the case here in India. it was actually lucky that he again got reinstated 6 weeks later. His own company again reopened and they took him back. But I think those sort of forces are required in India too, because at the end of the day, I don't think any employer wants to actually exploit his or her employees.
So that we have matured as an industry. I think employers are very matured because they need to utilize their employees in the most optimum manner to get the eventual benefits that they are looking at.
True, because
those are wonderful points. And
because if the industry benefits, then I think all the employees also do stand to benefit.
Right. Your points are very well taken. And I think I will move to Mr. Prasad now, who has been waiting very patiently. Sir, to you, 2 questions, sir. You have hands-on experience in how employers, and especially in the manufacturing and service sector. So I think you're mute, sir. You might want to unmute yourself. So you have hands-on experience on the floor level, how you have dealt with, employee unrest, you have dealt with dispute resolution issues. Do you believe, and you have experience across manufacturing and service sector, you have peers in the industry. What do you believe? Do you believe that the industry is ready to be able to do these dispute resolution mechanisms in a very peaceful way? After all, the IDA is looking to, create peace and harmony in the organization. Do you believe in the absence of IDA, the industry is today well equipped to handle such issues?
Yeah, thank you, Purnima, for giving an opportunity to participate with this session. Okay, whatever, again, my disclaimer is whatever I express my view, it is my personal view, should not be treated or seen as our company view. Okay, with this disclaimer, I would like to respond to your question. Definitely, first of all, industries are ready to accept these reforms in both the hands. Okay, that's the first answer. Now, before that, getting into that, I want to put it to for the discussion. Our labor laws are very, very outdated, 70 years. Okay, and one thing I got a confidence, including Mehta San or Mehta Sir is saying that reform is acceptable, but with conditions. But that gives you a very confidence that all speakers are towards reformation, right? So I would like to put my perspective how the reformation should be there. Definitely, the reformation is required. Very outdated labor laws we have, and look into that 70 years back, how's our generation, how the society, and what is now. So can we continue with this? Everything changes. You look into that, tax law changes. Okay, administrative law, there is a change. Everywhere it happens. Land reforms happens. Then why not labor laws? Labor law has to be, because industry has to survive and then has to be. Then the purpose of the reformation, I would like to classify with a couple of points. One is, as a couple of speakers expressed, industry has to survive, economy has to grow. That's one major point. But in the meantime, exploitation has to be removed. Now, a lot of socialistic they speak. Can you see the current labor law, the protection is only for 4 or 5%. 90% or 95% laborers were exploited. It is a fact of the this one, today's this one. Why now? Mehta San was asking, so many category of employment came, like badli, casual, then contract, now outsource, all this. Why it has come? Because every case, when we say, speak about, you go to up to Supreme Court, they come with them, stay just stuck down. Poor person who, without knowing this complication, he invested here. Now he has to survive. So what happens? A professions like us, we will give an advice. Okay, this is the way we can do it. So is it not in exploitation? It is happening in exploitation, because our laws, ID Act is so rigid, as Prashant San said, 100 people above, then you cannot do. And small scale industry has to start as a small scale, survive as a small scale, and die as a small scale, right? So very, very important is ID Act has to be, there should be an amendment. Now, before getting into an amendment of UP or Madhya Pradesh, I'm not going to comment on that. My point, there should be a lot of thought process has to be done. In fact, the government of India has made codifying of these 4 codes, and they were making an attempt to make some reformation. But frankly speaking, my personal opinion, it's not a real reformation. They are putting 4 clusters and dumping all these laws. Is it any reformation? If you look into that, some of the provisions are much more stringent. Industry, every workman can go, even including contract workman, go to court and he can file a criminal case. Is it required in a industry? Then the industry, can we encourage the industry to invest here? So the issue is, we need to really, when we make for any reformation, we have to look into that, how to balance between flexibility in terms of employer, and also no exploitation, and also there should be a transparency so that Inspector Raj should be eliminated completely, okay? Or middleman people eating, that has to be eliminated. And also there should be on time a transparency, and a labor should be able to utilize his benefits according to his.
Very interesting thoughts, sir.
Yeah.
Please.
My point is, now we are talking about the migrant labor.
No, sir, we'll come to that later, sir.
I think how the exploitation happened. Now we have a social security act, 50 years or 60 years old. That's it is really serving the purpose. ID Act, we say, ID Act takes care of around maybe 4 or 5% of unionized employees. What about the unorganized sector employees? There's exploitation is going on. So my point is, majorly when we make it, it should be a common, applicable to every category of employees, and there should be a transparency, and there should be a process wherein least criminal, getting into the Inspector Raj or prosecution part. Now,
absolutely, points very well taken, sir. I would just like to sum up what you are saying, sir. From your perspective, what you are saying is, yes, reforms are needed. Yes, industry is ready. However, the rationalization of the reforms probably need to be done. Maybe not a suspension, but maybe requisite amendments. But from your view, the industry is ready. There does, however, continue to be a risk of exploitation in unorganized sectors. With that thought, I will quickly move to the legal luminaries again for 2 minutes. Just any brief responses you might want to give, Prashant sir, to any of the views that you have heard here, and then Shalin sir, just brief 2-minute responses before I move on with further questions.
Well, it has already been clarified that insofar as this proposed amendment by promulgating the ordinance is concerned, it is not a blanket withdrawal of all the facilities which are otherwise available to the labor. There are enough checks and balances. And for instance, the Provident Fund, the Building and Construction Workers Act, the Workmen Compensation Act, all these acts have been maintained as they are. And looking at the timing is one of the things which has been spoken of. I think the timing at which this ordinance has been issued, I think one of the purposes of the ordinance is to encourage industries to freely employ the large number of migrant workers that have come back. Otherwise there would be, if there are any constraints, then that would be a problem to absorb these migrant laborers also who have come back. So this is one of the things that also is taken care of automatically.
That is very insightful. Shalin sir, any observations you might want to make for the points that have come out so far from the industry?
Only one actually, because for me that is a core actually, hire and fire. Sorry for coming back to that, but again, see, the problem I have is that you can even imagine that there is a new act which says that hire and fire is okay. Okay, let's say that the idea is wiped out and there is a new act where the parliament says that, look, employers, hire and fire is okay, don't worry. The problem is that will it stop over there? That again is going to be tested on the anvil of Article 14. And as far as India is concerned, if you look at our jurisprudence, job security has been one of the major issues that has always bothered India. And Supreme Court has always made concessions. I would say always in favor of the workers, mostly in favor of the workers. Actually, Supreme Court has been in favor of providing job security to the workers, to the teeming millions. So if you have such a legislation which allows hire and fire, I again come back to the Article 14 argument. I don't think it's going to be sustained because our constitutional ethos are just not apt or appropriate or ready for that.
Right, sir.
So that I see that as a lurking problem. Again, as I mentioned, reforms, yes. Therefore, my whole take on the subject is that employers can avoid this. How can they avoid this? It is by doing proper manpower planning, which never happens. Ms. Datla mentioned about industry. I'm sure she's right. I would only say that all her observations are right for industries which are really very, very seasoned and which employ skilled workers. But the moment you come down to unskilled workers and you look at small employers, I don't think there is any exercise of manpower planning at all. People, I mean, you'll find employers who will just hire 50 and then they'll say next month or probably after 6 months, they'll say, no, I know I only need 20, fire the remaining 30, and then again employ some 40. So manpower planning can avoid all this. And you can also be comfortable in the system of hire and fire, let's say. But manpower planning is very important, which is not found.
So what you're saying, basically, you're echoing the thoughts that also Mr. Prasad has said, that, you know, there are certain segments in the industry where exploitation may continue to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
With that, yeah, with that thought, I will go to the next question to Mr. Jaikumar, sir. You're a company which is spread all across India. So while we have understood now the loopholes that may be there, the argument that, you know, we must give the government a chance, government also is coming with a thought. It is not that the government has not put any thought into it. Otherwise, these provisions would not have been culled out for otherwise the government would have just given a blanket order. But then, of course, the jurisprudence, the basic principles enshrined in the Constitution, Article 14, all those will also play out, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. But now, from a practical perspective, sir, a company like yours, which has operations all across the country in different sites, you know, how is this going to play out with different states having different laws? For example, UP is talking about factories and manufacturing. Maybe it may not be applicable for you there, but then if you talk about Gujarat and new industrial units, you were to start something new in Gujarat, then that would definitely get covered. Likewise, MP has its own set of rules, and likewise other states may follow suit. So how is this going to play out for you? Do you believe that it's a rational way to go about different states? I understand the demographics and the needs of different states are different, but would it not be better to look at the union, the codes that they are making, and then that percolates?
Very interesting question and a strategic question. First of all, we need some more clarity on all these enactments which are coming. We have to get deep into that. Secondly, I fully agree there has to be some uniformity. Though Professor Chandra and Mehta will say it is a concurrent list and every state has got a power to do that. But in spite of that, there has to be some commonness across. I was very happy when the 4 codes came about, though they may say it is only a compilation of things. Now I'm scared, instead of 4, vertical, it should not become horizontal layer. Right? See, if luckily even in the hours of work and overtime which has come out, some states have changed from 9 hours to 12 hours, and the spread over has also increased. And some said double overtime, some have said single overtime. Immediately they rolled back. That is a different issue. So there has to be a common, some amount of uniformity, but definitely based on the state, based on the demographics, based on the thing, there can be some amendments. And that we should welcome that 4 codes to brought out. The other 3, forget about it. Now, at least for the wage part of it, which I've gone slightly into detail, I'm quite happy with that. If you see the number of returns, number of definitions, the processes, everything has been reduced drastically. The returns, everything has been brought down drastically, and gives a clear focus for an employer to what is to be and the number to be implemented. But one thing that should be common, like they were talking about that the national floor level minimum wages across the thing, right? But there is a mention in the act. So there has to be some commonality across that will be useful for the employers for effective implementation. At the same time, in very specific areas which has required state intervention, that has to be corrected. But not a matrix of laws should not be there.
Coming from a seasoned professional like you who is doing it on a daily basis, you're probably dealing with so many compliances across different states. I mean, this is definitely a very important suggestion, and I hope it goes down to the right decision makers. But sir, one more point that I want to ask you, and this is a bit of a telling question. There's very little information out there, but there seems to be, in the post-COVID era, a sort of protectionist attitude that's coming within the states in respect of the supply that they have. Will this not burden the demand supply issues that are already going on? The supply chain will get impacted, And B, will it not become more cumbersome for companies like yours to take workers? Maybe you take more workers, so you can tell me from where, but I'm assuming it will be from the UP, Bihar belt, places like these. So if there are these requirements, you'd probably start looking elsewhere. How would that work?
See, definitely in the short run, there will be an issue because we have very select pockets which particular skill sets are available, right? But till now, nothing has come out very explicitly that you cannot engage other people. That interstate migrant workman is there. That arrangement is still going fine. But as we say, the individual goals are important, but the superordinate goals are more important. So we should not look at an individual state part of it. We should look at overall the industry, the nation, the economy. We should look at it. So definitely it should be there should not be any bottlenecks in such type of enactments. Definitely, I am sure that the government will also look into that and come out with a very progressive policies. And I am very optimistic about it.
Absolutely, there is no reason for us to believe that thought will not go into it. As Mr. Mehta said, only knee-jerk reaction should not be there. And as Prashant sir said, a lot of thought. Government is also thinking very proactively. Government is not just sitting and reacting. So if we get out of that reactive mode and the right thoughts are given, then perhaps these I would say limited protectionist measures, if put in the right manner with the right intention of making sure that their labor is protected, maybe will work well.
But we have to ensure that one particular sector is not being exploited. In case if that comes, there should be a preventive, like interstate migrant workman licenses and all those things should come inside. But it may not happen because of the demand and supply and the requirement in the future.
So before I move on to the next panelist, one last question for you, sir. I believe L&T does a lot of good CSR work for the labor, and that is one area where government labor reforms can also probably be looking at how CSR can be done for your own workforce. I mean, charity begins at home. You have to take care of your workers first before you go out and do CSR activities. Do you believe that is a good area that the government can tap into for purposes of reform?
We are doing a lot of work in this area of skill training. We have construction skills training institute in 8 to 9 locations. If you go there, it typically looks like a polytechnic or a ITI. We have a principal, we have different trades, carpentry, masonry, electrician, plumbing, etc. We take people from 10th pass or 10th failed from different backgrounds. We bring them there, we provide accommodation, we provide food, we provide them stipend, we give them 3 months training, send them to site to ensure that they get hands-on training. After a period of 6 months, bring them there. So it's a level of, till level 6, there's a course where they reach to the level of foreman. So a lot of work is being done, and more than it is a CSR, I'll say that we are spending on it. But another way of looking at it, there is a demand. You have to grow your own timber. You have to develop your own people for that. So there is a need, and a lot of things is being done by L&T.
Thank you so much for those very, very insightful comments, sir. Now I will move on to Mr. Prasad. Mr. Prasad, I have one question from you for you. And this is not relevant. I'm not asking for an organization specific answer here. In general, in the auto sector, we have seen a lot of contract workers being taken because of the ease, especially sectors like yours, where automation, modernization, skill development, these things are extremely important. And resistance is faced through the unions, when there is modernization because job losses are there. So contract workers are usually taken. Do you believe that with these labor reforms, you will try and do away with that? Because that doesn't help anyone. Your laborers don't have any buy-in to your organization's ethics. They don't have any loyalty. They resist. There is no skill investment going into them. Do you believe that it will be a good thing from this perspective? More workers will become skilled.
Yeah, Purnima. See, you said the contract labor, because the auto industry is, if you see, from the last couple of years, it is highly fluctuating, right? One thing. Second, still in India, you owning a car, it has not come to us in a need, like Europe countries or US. It is still in a part of luxury. So a situation like COVID, now you take it a COVID. Now the priority goes with your basic essentials. So always this anything happens in the market fluctuation immediately impacts on auto industry. That's why most of the auto industries having big number of contract labor, so that the business requirement they can have that arrangement. Okay, That's a basic reason. Of course, having said that, in our company, we never encourage for contract labor only working on the line or in a production process. Okay, one thing. Second point, you are talking about the skill development. Even in auto industries now, even if they have to put in a contract manpower, has to be they have to be trained, because your product now you have to compete in the market, within international market. You have to develop them also. Skill development part of that, a couple of months or they have to be focused. But having said that, contract labor is not a substitute for actually this one. It is now, because of the restrictions in where you have whenever you want to have a flexibility of hiring and reducing the manpower depending on your business. So this opportunity is not available. That's why most of the industries, they go with 30% or 40%, some or 50%. They go with a flexi manpower, like contract you say, or trainees. All these things. Now recently they are using the NEEM also, right? So that they are able to balance. That's the basic reason. That's the reason my point is, unless we really make flexible these rigid laws, exploitation happens in a backdoor.
So my question
we are trying to prevent exploitation of, please.
So my question
that's the
was,
reason.
so that we don't miss that point. You made a very good point about flexibility. So one point that has been talked about, and I think in the center some laws are being mulled over that also, is fixed term contracts. Do you believe that would be a good solution?
That's the reason. If you ask me my opinion, reformation has to be happened. And it should be like a fixed contract. Okay, my image, I'm just, if you permit me, I'll take 2 minutes, I will tell you.
Sure, sir,
my
please.
image, it should be like a fixed, okay? But definitely, there should be, it should not be just hire and fire happening. If he has asked to go, some amount of compensation has to be paid, okay? And also, there should be a lot of transparency required in this. So probably like, we have an employment card, introduction of an employment card, so that he has not exploited during his employment, one part, and also he gets his all social security and the fixed wage. As now even the code is national code, we're saying the national wage. Something has to be fixed on that, and every category of labor has to be ensured this security. Otherwise, what happens? A small amount of people, now you are asked, contract labor in auto industry, not only auto industry, I can say every industry is having 50 to 30%, 40%, depending on the requirement, they have a contract employee, because the issue is flexibility, productivity, and the cost conscious, and you have the restrictions, so that when you want to dispense with them, you're not able to do it. That's the reason everybody goes with this process of contract labor. Okay, so that's why even if you bring in a uniform code or whatever that we speak about, these 4 codes, unless these things are addressed, this would continue.
Your points are very well taken. I hope they reach the ears of people who should be listening to them. And with that, I think, sir, then I would be right in saying that alternate mechanisms like fixed term contracts, where people actually buy into your organization's culture, they are willing to get developed in skill, you can always renew their contracts. This may be an alternate way of reforming as opposed to just complete suspension. So a quick 2 minutes, sir, because I have to move on to the next panelist.
See, now you look into that, the coming generations are highly skilled. Employability is not an issue like 50 years or 20 years. It's an employability is definitely there, and high demand for the skilled labor. In fact, industries are waiting for a skilled labor so that they can reduce their burden and they can have a better product. As L&D, Mr. Jayakumar said, we have our own training center, 3 years residential training. We develop them because we need a skilled manpower, and of course we employ, or even we are not able, we are not able to employ. They all 100% from the last 10 years, all 100% is employed, and they're well settled. So my point is, once an industry gives an opportunity on skill development, definitely hire and fire won't be an issue, because they'll definitely, some industries are waiting, and employability is there, not the employment. Employability.
Very interesting thought, sir. Very interesting thoughts. In fact, that echoes what Prashant sir said, that, we have moved,
Absolutely.
eons now from 70 when the laws were made to now where we stand. And we have to look at these laws in the context of where we are today. And you have given a very good alternate solution to what Mehta sir said, that, the hire and fire will possibly be challenged. So if the industry is matured enough to see how they can handle the hire and fire situation, maybe a solution can come out in that, but that will be long term. In the short run, yes, hire and fire may be questioned by court, as Mr. Mehta said. But moving on.
IR code is bringing a reskilling fund also now, like retrenchment 15 days to be contributed. So everything is progressively they are thinking. The government is also thinking on this.
Absolutely. There is a lot of thought going on. Sometimes, yes, we are human after all. People living, people in the higher places are also human. There may be some actions, but we have the courts. The courts will look into it. But having said that, I think there is a lot of thought process going on. With that, I will come to Vanitha Garu. Vanitha Garu, a few quick questions before we open the floor to the attendees to ask their questions, and I can put those questions across to you. We have been talking about skill development, and I really want to ask you here, do you think enough is being done for skill development for women in these policy reforms that are being there? Because we are just talking about suspension of laws and continuance of maternity benefit, or maybe, minimum wage, and women come in the same, but there is no conversation around skill development, especially for women, because women tend to get pushed down further when it comes to equal opportunity at work.
Yeah, Purnima, so especially in the lower rung of the job strata, I think there is no focus on women getting the requisite skills. While we do have a lot of ITIs and other skill centers, most of them are actually focusing more on the male gender. I don't think any state or government or institution is actually focusing so much more on women. Probably there are progressive institutions here and there, but there are just a handful of them. So probably I think no government intervention is required here. No, you bring out a more level playing field there. I know quota system is not correct, but probably until we have a level playing field, we will have to ensure that no certain quotas are allocated to women, so that at every level of skill sets that are needed to be acquired, women also find a place to get skilled in those professions.
Those are wonderful thoughts. I'm not sure how workable quota may be, but definitely, India is a welfare state, and
Yes.
India, the government has to hold hands of those people who probably need a little more hand-holding. And maybe
probably more incentivization for industries or for institutions that are able to bring in a requisite number of women on board and help them find placements, especially in the core sectors, because most of the sectors are actually, again, very male dominated. If you look at core industry, if you look at auto, you look at mining and metallurgy and things like that, you find very, very few women actually on the shop floor. So it would be actually good to bring in diversity in those places. So
Absolutely.
Yes, government can play a very empowering role there to bring in more women at this also actually will have a lot of impact on societal norms too in the long run.
So that is in fact a very good point you brought out, because long run and short run, we need to be cognizant of the two. What can be done in the short term, but without losing the focus on the long term, as Mr. Mehta had also said, that it cannot be taken in silos. You cannot take short run in one context, and long run, what do you want to achieve in the long term in one context. And as you rightly said, women empowerment doesn't have to be only looked at as what women are getting. Maybe in social your ecosystem incentivization, your industry, the family getting incentivized in some way, like some sort of tax rebate, or maybe some sort of subsidies to the industry to generate women to come, not only join but sustain them even during those times when they leave the work and they come back. So there's a lot that can be done there, and policy reforms, probably labor reforms. When we talk about labor reforms, there should be a little focus, if not much, on this. And I would say much, but we would I'm sure the government would look at it. But yes, it should be an area which should be looked at. With that, I think I will just come back to the senior advocates who have taken out time to be with us to give any closing thoughts that they might have. Quick thoughts, and then we will go out. There are lots of questions there, about some 17, 18 questions already, which means you have really made people, brought them to think. So I will then try and address as many questions as we can. I will put them to you. Sir, quick thoughts that you might have, Prashant sir and Shalin sir.
Since it is basically centering around the reforms that are in practically every one is in unison insofar as the reforms are concerned, I think one of the things which requires consideration is that one should not be having laws that a person is forced to circumvent them. By forced circumvention, I mean where it becomes imperative for survival of the industry to look for ways and means. Why is this menace of contract labor or any sort of labor which is not in the regular employment? Don't you think that this is boiling down to the harshness of the labor laws against the industry? So this is also one thing which needs to be considered. And then ultimately, as Mr. Prasad said, barely about 5% to 10% people of the labor force is actually reaping the benefit of the labor laws. What about the rest? So
Right.
this is why I said that these reforms are sought to be brought in at the most appropriate time. And they are not basically because of COVID, but it has, thought process.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for your thoughts. Shalin, sir, any closing remarks you might want to make?
Well, I'll only say one thing. Actually, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I am absolutely for reforms, and I think COVID-19 provides a damn good reason. Also, obviously, I mean, who can deny that the life of law ultimately is not logic; it is experience, and that's what Justice Holmes said. But having said that, I think what the government needs to do is identify the stakeholders and incorporate all when you have long-term measures or even short-term measures, but whatever measures they are, you've got to speak to all the stakeholders. Your reforms must talk to all the stakeholders. That's the only way actually you can have a better society. That's my take.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all these lovely views that we have got. These are exactly what we need in today's times. I hope they can go to the right ears and we can have some cognizance of the appreciation that is being given to them and the suggestions that are giving. With that, I will just read out a few questions. We don't have enough time to read out all the questions, but the specific questions that have been asked, I will read them out. There is a question to Mehta sir from Manoj Kumar. Mehta sir, in private sector, most employers prefer to hire contractors to provide workforce. Hire and fire is always available to such employers. I am talking about textile industries in Ahmedabad and other parts of the country. Then recent changes, hire and fire, merely a declaration by government. Such hire and fire is always available to employers with respect to contract workforce. So I guess, we have covered that issue on contract, but if there is any point that you want to add, please.
Just one thing. Yes, it's true that it happens in practice, but remember one thing, that the contract labor system is considered by the Supreme Court to be a pernicious system. And if you see the object of the Contract Labor Act, it mentions that the object is to abolish contract labor wherever possible, but where it is not possible, to regulate contract labor. So again, we come down to regulations. And as Mr. Datta mentioned actually about government intervention, I am a complete champion of intervention by the government. Because I still believe that unless you have two parties who can negotiate at arm's length, there is the government required for regulating, because if there is inequality, obviously you need the government's hand actually to help the little man. So as far as contract labor is concerned, in any case, contract labor does have provisions actually which provide for some kind of protection to contract labor. So that's not really an issue.
Right. Thank you so much. And I will move on to a specific question to Prashant sir. Prashant sir, it has to do with the ability to plan before hasty execution. Has enough thought been put behind these proposals of suspending statutes that was enacted after a lot of effort, or someone is doing something just because they can? The point is that the debates are happening on TV, that the debates are happening on TV and webinars, and nothing solid has been put up by the government. No white paper, no solid data on which to build up. Even you are building on gut reactions. The question, like demo and lockdown, is whether the foundations of these proposed changes are questionable, sir.
Well, if you look into the ordinance and the intention of the government which is portrayed through it, the ordinance per se may not contain the objects and the reasons for which it has been promulgated. But if you look into it dispassionately, then you would find that it appears to be a well thought out paper. It is not without thought that they have issued this ordinance. And in a state like UP, the enormity of the state, they wouldn't do it So there has to be some thought, and it is reflected in the ordinance itself.
And I guess in due course, when the act is actually enacted, there will be more.
You will get the reasons, yes.
Yes, yes. Sir, Mr. Jaykumar, sir, there is a question specifically to you. Mr. Jaykumar, the issue with not getting labor is because of lack of skills. The onus is on the industry and the government for not skilling enough people to work in the industry. We have been underspending on education for decades, and the industry has unfortunately not invested enough in skilling. Your thoughts on that, sir?
There are two corporates here. Both the corporate, I said we have a skill development center and doing, even Toyota said they are doing it. And government is doing a lot of effort, like NSDC is doing a whole lot of skill development. And yes, the pace in which we are growing, whether the development is sufficient, that we have to see. Not only at the worker or grassroots level, even in as employability, if you see India Skill Report 2021, so only 46% of the engineers coming out are employable. So there is a need to industry to integrate, coordinate with the universities, education institutes, IITIs, all the areas, and government also is doing a lot of effort. There are schemes available today and do that. Efforts are being taken. Yes, whether it is sufficient or not, we have to see. Some more efforts are required to match the skill demand in the biggest. If you ask somebody who is losing sleep, is because of the talent. If you ask me, many of my business leaders, what is that you lose sleep? Is a talent at all levels, right from grassroots level to top level. Today, the whole core committee is discussing about how do we get the workforce back with the job. So in a long-term measure, we have to, every organization should start skills training. There's a partnership with NSDC and other skill training institutes, and we have to develop grassroots level skills.
That's a very, as you rightly said, two major industries, industrial houses are present here, and you have invested tremendously in skill development. So that's an answer in itself. Yes, there is a long way to go still, but that the thought has started, and that there is a deliberation around that, I think is a very positive note. There is one question which has come. In fact, I would like to ask you, what is your thought on work from home? Is that going to bring a different dimension altogether in the way labor reforms are done over time? Maybe not right away, but over time, do you believe work from home will also turn out to be a new game changer?
See, today, you would have seen in the media, most of the companies are looking at it and working on that. And including TCS has talked about 78% of the people will be working from home. And it is the domain specific, like in a project-based company, how we can do a work from home. But still, we have formed a task forces and to look at how this can be implemented. In fact, I would broadly look at the workforce into four. One is the core critical, which has to be at a project site, at the manufacturing plant. It cannot be done at work from home at all. And the other is totally, you can have the other end of the spectrum is like if you have a finance person or a taxation person or a learning and development person, you can straight away sit and work from home. See, for example, during the lockdown period, in fact, I didn't find any of our HR activity got stopped, or finance activity got stopped. Finance, the annual accounts got closed. Otherwise, every time I find people sitting night 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the office, even without coming, the things have closed. Because we have invested in technology, we have invested in digitalization, we could move ahead and do that. So one is the other extreme we cannot do. Then this also gives you an opportunity to relook at your the workforce. You can have a liquid workforce where you can do multi-skilling. You can have somebody is a hybrid, little from work from home, little from office. So each organization, based on their business model, based on their structure, based on their culture, they have to look at a work from home option. Definitely there is a saving in terms of infrastructure, saving of manpower. Not only that, quicker, faster decision making happens. So you cannot give a one size fits all type of a policy. Each organization has to look at their business model and then plan the strategy how to go into work from home.
Thank you so much, sir. And with that, we will come to a close now. I would like to thank the panelists who have taken out time from their busy schedules and have accepted to be here. Thank you so much, sir. And The insights that we have got are amazing, tremendous, I would say. We have both the legal minds and the industry experts here, and putting and no less than people of the repute of Prashant sir and Shalin sir, and of course the industry players who are very well hands-on into the market. Thank you so much. And I would like to say one thing in an excitement to introduce the lovely panel that we have. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Purnima Kamble. I take care of the practice in Telangana and Andhra for Fox Mandal. It has been a pleasure. I would like to thank all the attendees for having taken out the time to see our session. And apologies if we've not answered any particular question in specific, because we believe those have been answered during the course of the discussion. But if anyone wants to reach out to either of the two lawyers here, please feel free to write into us. We will put you on to them and you can ask them. But we are not giving any legal opinions, and these are not binding opinions. Please seek your counsels in case you need to get any answers. I would also like to thank the team of Fox Mandal, which has been working behind the scenes. I would like to thank my partners Kaustav Chandra and Shamal Mukherjee, who are labor lawyers and employment lawyers, who have also given a lot of thought to this session, though behind the scenes. So while I am the face, I would like to say they are more working behind the scene, and they have really put in a lot of thought. I would also like to thank Santosh Vikram Singh and his IT team, which is Maniswini and Sri Kumar, for having put this event together for us, and of course the FM family and CII IWN. I cannot thank them enough for having Ms. Datla on the session and giving us the views and very good thoughts about what needs to be done for the women in workforce. With this, I would like to bring to close today's session, and we look forward to having some more meaningful discussions in times to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima.
Thank you, Purnima.